Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Down Syndrome Center podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Kishore Volodi. And last time we had a podcast guest who was sharing with us about power of attorney and guardianship and a lot of young adult, early adulthood issues that maybe some families aren't really thinking about and really need to be thinking about because of how serious those things are. And I really wanted to make sure that we had Dr. Andy McCormick back on again today. Andy, we're not going to have you introduce yourself again. I think people can listen to our last podcast, but thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thank you for having me.
We've had many folks come on and talk to us about financial planning and special needs trusts and things like that. I don't know that we've actually ever sat down and really talked about things like SSI. So do you mind just give us some ideas on what that is and what we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, it's usually something that it's not even on our, so it's so interesting that it's the same discussions I've had about decision-making as well as financial stuff. It's really not on your radar screen when your kid's younger than 18. And it's almost like a shock to your system because you haven't been dealing with it. Most of our families, their kids don't receive SSI or supplemental security income as a child. But it changes when they turn 18. And the reason why is the system is built a little bit different. So as a child, so supplemental security income is supposed to support people who have differences that impair their ability to work and also have an economic hardship. So as kids, how that's determined is based on what's called a qualifying diagnosis. And so Down syndrome is actually a qualifying diagnosis. And then also the income of the parents, right? Because the parents are the primary financial support of anyone less than 18, or that's kind of the expected situation. And so typically, unless you kind of fit into a category of low income, then probably you're not receiving any SSI support for a child with Down syndrome. But even if you are at 18, that all changes. So it no longer is based on a qualifying diagnosis and the income of the parents. It's based on functional capacity. So having a qualifying diagnosis and how is that causing impairment to work, and the income of the young adult. So how does that play out? So usually what I tell families when we're kind of getting close, so 16 years of age, we should really be kind of thinking and processing about this, is that Social Security, like a lot of government organizations, they don't do the same thing every time. But if you know the baseline of what their expectations are and you're prepared for that, there won't be any delays. So what's baseline? So you have to be able to demonstrate functional kind of that your disability, your difference is causing some functional impairment. And for individuals with Down syndrome, how that is defined is having your karyotype. So that thing you had when your child was just born, so documentation of that, and then also a recent IQ test. And so the interesting thing is public school systems will provide this because this is part of your education if you ask for it. So usually I tell families within a year of graduating or a year of turning 18, you should get an IQ test. If you have those two documents, that will be significant enough for you to qualify from a functional standpoint for SSI benefits. The second piece is the kind of income-based portion of the young adult. And what are those standards? So there's really two standards. How much wealth does that young adult have? And then how much money is that young adult making or income do they have? So the first is wealth. And that's where it kind of talks about all that planning stuff that we talked about before in some of those other lectures. But the planning stuff is because there is a hard stop that you can't have more than $2,000 of wealth. And wealth doesn't just mean money in your bank account. It means financial assets. So that's the CD that's in your name from your grandma who bought it for you when you were 2 years of age, some stocks that are in your name, all of those cumulative together can't be more than $2,000. And of course, there's a couple areas of ways in which we've been able to modify around that, right? So special needs trust, you guys had a lecture about that previously on a podcast. You can go back and look, but it's a way of basically creating, for a better word, companies in the name of a child that you can put assets in. And so the company owns the assets, but the function of the company is to support the child. So you can actually have an unlimited amount of money in a trust fund in that way. And those are really helpful from that perspective. The other is kind of a newer thing that's been created that is a government-based, for a better use of the word, trust fund called ABLE accounts, in which you're able to put up to $100,000 within that, that can't count against you. And so if you have trust funds, you can have an unlimited amount. If you have an ABLE account, you can have up to $100,000 in your ABLE account and then $2,000 in assets before it counts against you financially. The one other thing I'll say about ABLE accounts, just so people know, they're, besides the $100,000, because they are based on college savings accounts, they're 529 accounts. They're actually 529A accounts. So that's why they're called ABLE accounts. You can only put so much in a year. So you can only put about $15,000 in a year. You can only have up to a max of 100,000 before it counts against you. So just some important numbers. So if you're thinking about that, but that's a way to kind of help support more than that $2,000 goal. The other piece though is your income. So how do they tell how much? So you can't have more than $2,000 at kind of the end of the month in your account. That's your kind of wealth goal. But you can also not make more than roughly about $1,500 a month before you lose some of the financial aspects of SSI. And I'm going to back up and explain that. So as an adult, typically SSI benefits are around $750. And then based on how much you earn, you start losing some of those benefits. So you lose $1 for every $2 you earn. So if you make $1,500, divide that by 2, you lose $750 of income. And it scales like that. So if you only made $500 in the month, right? That's only going to be $250 off of your SSI benefits. So you still get $500 of SSI benefits and $500 of your income. So you actually make more money. You'll get $1,000. So it's meant to encourage people to work, but also still get some of that SSI benefit. Really, really important. In Pennsylvania, so don't take this nationally, but in Pennsylvania and in some other states, you should look into this. Sometimes if you make too much money, as long as you've received SSI benefits fully for 1 month, the next month, if you make more than $1,500, so you lose all your financial benefits, you still get some of the other, what I call like fringe benefits or connected benefits to your SSI. So when people think of SSI, they think of the monthly financial money you get, but you also have your Medicaid connected to it, so your health insurance, and there's also something called waivers. And waivers are these special funds that are meant to help keep people in the community. And so they often pay for things like job coaches, right? So you get a waiver that pays for you to have a job coach so you can have a job so that you can work and make money and have a kind of connection within your community, so that if you have a job that makes more than that $1,500 a month, you don't lose your waiver that's paying for your job coach. So the fringe benefits in Pennsylvania are still kind of connected, even if you lose that monthly financial benefit. And so that's just a little bit about SSI and kind of how that functions. One last thing I'll say is if a kid receives SSI as in childhood because mom and dad meet those income requirements, don't think it just rolls over to adulthood. So you should make sure and keep your eyes out when you turn 18. Typically, it's a much easier process. You can basically sign a document and then show some proof and you automatically roll in. But if you don't do that, then it automatically shuts off and you'll have to start the process over. So just be on the lookout that you don't just kind of ignore letters saying, hey, you need to apply for SSI as an adult because you think you already have it. It does change and will roll out if you don't do anything about it.
Oh, that's really helpful, Andy. Thanks. Thanks for filling us in. The waiver part of it too, I think, is something that you said is very state specific, and so it's important for our families to look things up. Where would you suggest? Are there reputable websites for families to go to for any of these topics that you might be able to suggest? Yeah.
So I mean, as far as in like Pennsylvania, so actually Pennsylvania's education, so department, I think it's PADIT. That office, because it's connected from education to employment, they have their Ready to Work program. They have a lot of information about waiver programs because waivers are so connected with people working and kind of employment after school. almost what you should have as you're moving from education, so that 18, 21-year-old gray area where you decide I'm leaving school into employment, you should have a kind of transition coordinator, your service coordinator, who should be your local person who should have also direct information to connect you with those resources. If you happen to be in Allegheny County, Achieva, which is the ARC, so our kind of support services, and you can look for your ARC in any of your in any area where you live in the country. Once again, to be a great resource to say, how can I connect those things? One thing I'll say about waivers are traditionally kind of limited resources, and people have to be on wait lists to get them. So I usually encourage our young adults, apply for a waiver as soon as you can. Usually it's around 18, because you may not get it till you're 21 when you're rolling out of the school system and you're rolling into employment. But it's important because you don't want that gap between like, hey, the school has said I aged out at 21, I'm supposed to go into the workforce. Now what do I do? And so that's really important to kind of start that earlier as you kind of move towards that process.
Well, that's really great, Andy. Thank you so much for all this information. I mean, really, these last two podcasts have really shown us how much there is to be prepared for as your child becomes an adult with Down syndrome, and how that looks like from a legal aspect, financial aspect, in the eyes of the government, all the different things that we've been talking about. I really appreciate that. And families, I know that's a lot to keep track of. And so if there's questions you have about how to do this process, or really other things that we've not even talked about in the transition process that you want to be prepared for, just reach out to our center. If you're here locally, we'd love to be able to see you, and you can reach out to us and we'll get your child connected. Anywhere 14 and above, we usually start the transition program. So with Dr. McCormick, so go ahead and reach out, let us know. In the meantime, also, if there's other topics you want us to be talking about in this podcast, questions that you've had about really anything related to Down syndrome, just reach out to us at Down Syndrome Center at chp.edu. As always, I'll say, if you want to partner with us in what we're doing, we also would love for that to be able to keep things like this podcast going, our transition program going. All the things that we do is all funded through philanthropy. So that would be going to givetochildrens.org/Down Syndrome Center. And we would love to have partners with you guys in the podcast realm as well. But until next time, bye-bye.